Once you have all your information together, you're going to be ready to create your new QuickBooks file. Before we get there though, I do want to move over to the right side of the screen and talk a little bit about this Have a Question live community window. By default, this opens up when you start QuickBooks, and it really is a great resource of both online help as well as live chat and questions that you can ask other people about what they're doing with QuickBooks, how to accomplish something, and those types of things. For now, we don't need it, so I'm going to go ahead and click on its own close button. And it's going to ask me if I want to open live community when I start QuickBooks. I'm going to say, well, no, I don't. Thank you. I can always get it from the help menu, and don't show that message again. Then I'll say OK. The window will close. There we go. And now we have more real estate. I just like to have more room on my screen and less clutter if I can help it. All right, so here we are in QuickBooks. We do not have a company open, of course, because we want to create one, and we're going to do so by clicking on the Create a New Company option. This brings us into the Easy Step interview. Now, I will tell you that you do not have to use the Easy Step interview. You can actually cancel out of this, and you can do all of the setup on your own. But unless you've done a lot of QuickBooks setup and a lot of accounting, I recommend that you go through the interview. Even if you feel like you know things, you can go through and just be sure that you haven't missed any steps. It's just as easy as clicking the Start Interview button when you want to get started. Now, this actually can be a fairly lengthy process, so make sure you're comfortable and you have all of your information together. The first thing I need to do is enter my company name. For this particular purpose, I'm going to create a new training company because you're taking computer training, so you can kind of relate to it. But really, all of these things will apply to virtually any company that you create. The name of my company is You Got It Training. If you have the same legal name, you can put that down as well. Just copy and paste or type it over again. Or if you're using a DBA or maybe you have other names, you might have two different entries here. I'm going to go ahead and use the same option. When I press Tab, QuickBooks nicely copies and pastes that for me, so I actually don't have to type it over again. This is actually the name, the legal name, that you'll use on all of your tax and legal forms, unless you use a DBA. The next thing it's going to want to know is a tax ID number. Now, this should be a federal employee ID number or a social security number, and it's only going to be used on tax forms. But you do need to have this, and you need to have it correct. So I'm going to enter a fake social security number for obvious reasons. QuickBooks will actually look at the formatting of this number, and if it doesn't follow the correct format for either an EIN or a social security number, it will give you an error. Now I'll go ahead and type in some additional information about my street address, my city, my country, my phone, and so forth. While you don't have to enter all of this information, and you can also enter it later, it's a good idea to go ahead and get a pretty good start on it. I'm going to skip the phone and fax information, as well as the email address and the website. Notice that it does tell you if something is a required field, and you must have that information. For example, the company name is required. Once you get through all of this, you can simply move to the bottom right and click on Next. Now QuickBooks asks you to select your industry, and I know that not every industry is here, but you want to select one that's as close as possible. Since I'm talking about doing computer training, I think I can look through the list and maybe find something that's pretty close. It's not accounting, it's not advertising, I'm definitely not in agriculture or farming, but if I scroll down just a little bit, I can see that they actually do have information technology, computers and software. Well, that might be pretty close, so I'll go ahead and make that choice. If you ever need help or want to know why QuickBooks is asking these questions, usually there's a link at the bottom. For example, this one says, "How does QuickBooks use my industry selection?" If you want to leave the interview at any time, you can also click the Leave button on the bottom left. We're going to go ahead and continue, so we'll click Next. The next thing it needs to know is that company entity. What are you? What is your legal identification as far as the IRS is concerned? Are you a sole proprietor, meaning you're unincorporated with only one owner? That's that 1040 Schedule C thing. Or are you a partnership or a limited liability company? Or an LLC itself? And if you are an LLC, notice that what you get is a single member LLC or a multi-member LLC. So we have those different options. QuickBooks again is going to try to help you make the best choice, but you really should know what the answer is before you get started with QuickBooks. Lastly, you can also have a corporation, a C Corp or an S Corp. Now there is one other thing that I didn't talk about, and that's a not-for-profit or a non-profit organization. This again requires special circumstances by the IRS and some special forms you have to fill out. So pick whichever one is most appropriate. For now, we're going to be a small company and we're going to start as a sole proprietor. Then we'll click on Next. In order for QuickBooks to do your accounting, it needs to know what the first month of your fiscal year is. For most businesses, it could be January. Now, if you're a large corporation or you have some seasonal type of activities, your fiscal year may start in a different month. I'm going to leave it at January, so my year will run from January 1st through December 31st. The next thing you need to do is set up an administrator password. Now, there is an administrator account, and we'll talk all about security and what this means a little bit later on. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Now QuickBooks is ready to start your file. See, that wasn't too bad at all. I'll click Next, and it might take QuickBooks several minutes to go ahead and create all of the things in the file that it needs. Before it can get there, though, it has to know what you want to call your company file. We've told it all about the company, but not the actual file name. Remember, this is the file that will be located on your computer and will end in the QBW file extension. By default, it simply wants to use your company name. Usually, that's a good idea. I'll go ahead and leave it as it is, make sure I save it into the right location, and then I'll click on Save. The next thing QuickBooks wants to do is help you customize QuickBooks for your business. We can go ahead and click Next. And it's asking us, what exactly do we sell? Do we sell products, services, or both? Remember that the main difference here is going to be whether you need to manage inventory. Because we need to learn about all different aspects of QuickBooks, I'm going to say that my company sells both services and products. For example, we probably provide computer training, live instructor-led in the classroom, but maybe we also provide products such as CBT training. With that selection, I can click Next. And they next want to know if you sell products online. You either do or you don't, but you may do so. As it says, QuickBooks will use this answer to display information about services. Now I'll tell you, QuickBooks does give you a few little, shall we say, add-ins that you can purchase. So I'm going to go ahead and say I don't sell online and I'm not interested in doing so, because we don't want to see those little marketing spiels. One of the big discussions that people have had in business lately, especially internet businesses, are who has to pay sales tax. Generally speaking, if you only provide services, you don't charge sales tax on those services. You only charge sales tax on actual products. But again, you need to check with your local tax commission to find exactly what applies to your location. I will say yes so that we can go through setting up the tax later on. Likewise, we're going to go ahead and give estimates so we can see the entire process for our customers. And we'll also use sales receipts. Likewise, if we have any outstanding balances, we want to send out statements. And we want to be able to use progress invoicing, where we charge somebody partway or maybe a deposit and then the rest of the bill as we progress through it or at finish only. We'll keep track of the bills we owe. And if you haven't figured it out, we're pretty much accepting all of the defaults, so we'll be able to see all of these features in QuickBooks. The next question is about printing checks. Do you currently print checks? You don't print checks, but you'd like to, or you'd print checks and you don't plan to. I do print checks. I love printing checks better than writing them, so I'll make that selection and once again go back to Next. And we're going to track inventory. We will also accept credit cards. One of the features we haven't talked about yet is the ability to track time in QuickBooks. Now, as a computer training company, I probably don't bill by the hour, but again, we'll leave this on so that we can see how you can work with billing customers for time spent by your employees. When you have employees, and we'll talk more about this later in the section, do they have W-2 forms, as in are they real employees, or are they 1099 contractors? There's a whole lot to know about making this particular choice, and we'll save that for when we talk about employees as a whole. If you forget to make a choice, you'll see that QuickBooks nicely reminds you. And I'll say, oh yes, sorry, we have both W-2 and 1099 contractors. One of the newer features that they've added into QuickBooks is the ability to track multiple currencies. Because of the global economy, this is really a nice feature that a lot of companies like. I do not do this, and we're not going to discuss it as part of the class, so I'll leave this as no. The next thing they talk about is the chart of accounts. This is the basis for everything that happens in QuickBooks, and we're going to do an entire chapter on it, so for now, we'll just say next. This is the start date. And it's actually very important because this is the date as of which everything in QuickBooks starts and is accurate. It could be today's date if you're a brand new company. It could be the end of the last quarter if you've closed everything out. It also could be technically a date sometime in the future. You need to make a good choice here. I'm going to go ahead and say that we're going to do this at the beginning of the fiscal year. Now, if I do that, that means I would have to go back and enter all of the balances and transactions since January 1st of 2009. You can see that that could be a lot of work. If you use today's date, then you'd have a clean cutoff. It would be everything as of today, and you wouldn't be going back and doing any entry. You can see why this is an important choice, and it also makes a big difference on how much data entry needs to be done. I'm going to add a bank account later because I want to show you how to do that. And then I'll click Next because what we're interested in is on the next screen. Remember a little while ago when we actually chose IT as the type of business we were going to create? Well, QuickBooks is now using that to create a sample chart of accounts. It says, okay, you think you're going to be in an IT business, then here's some accounts that I recommend you have. You'll notice that they aren't generic. For example, they're not just income and expenses. Because we chose IT, they think we're selling things like hardware and software, support and maintenance. So it really is in your best interest to make a good choice early on in the interview, and then at this point you can come back in and review the chart of accounts instead of having to either have all generic accounts or having to customize it all yourself. Now, naturally, not every IT business is going to be the same. So what you want to do at this step in the interview is remove any accounts that you don't think you're going to use. For example, I'm in IT, but I only provide training. I don't actually sell hardware and software. So I'm going to move to the left-hand column and simply remove the check mark from sales hardware and sales software. Because we have that double entry bookkeeping thing going on, if I look a little bit further down the list, you'll also see that if I'm going to be selling hardware, then I probably at some point had to also purchase it. Notice that this is a cost of goods sold account, not just a regular expense, because this is something that's going into inventory. Because I'm not selling the hardware, I also wouldn't be purchasing it, and I'll remove both hardware and software check marks. Now, if you go kind of crazy and you get all your check marks mixed up, you can always come back down to the bottom and click the button that says Restore Recommendations. But I've only made a couple of changes, so at this point I'm going to click Next. And one more time. And wait for QuickBooks to create my account. I have to say, QuickBooks does actually have this little habit that's kind of annoying when it constantly wants you to go ahead and sign up for things. This is asking me to set up my Intuit account, which is not a bad thing. I just don't want to do it right now. So I'm going to move to the upper right corner of this dialog box and simply close it down and let QuickBooks finish its work. Now, once again, I'm seeing a couple things on my screen. Sometimes, have you ever heard the saying that it's too helpful? Well, that's what QuickBooks is doing right now. There's a feature called the Quickbooks Coach, which I don't need, so I will close that. And you'll notice it kind of zooms over to the right side. And also Live Community came back up, so I'm going to turn that one off. And then maximize my window. Alrighty, so now we actually have our finished QuickBooks account.